in world champion in late 1800s, he argued that chess was a draw with perfect play. Not just that it might be. He says, I believe with perfect play, chess will be a draw. There were a handful of people who were worried, like Fischer, Capablanca, and Lasker, that it would result in a draw death. That is, the more and more advanced opening theory becomes, the stronger players get, that eventually every game would just end up being a draw because they would always play perfectly. I put this Bent Larson quote up here. I'm a big fan of his games. He says, specifically in symmetric openings, white has a theoretic advantage because of the first move advantage. However, in many of them, it is only theoretical. You can find a handful of even his games in which, with a perfectly symmetric position, it is just so difficult to find anything to bite on, despite the fact white gets the first move, so should be statistically more likely to win. This fear of the draw death pushed them to introduce variants. So it's chess, but something about it is a little bit different. I thought first we'd look at a more complex variant, just Fischer random, also called 960. The idea is all the pieces on the back rank, so from one rook to the other rook, have been permuted. So they've been moved around, shuffled. I say specific rules. Some of these rules make sense. Like you want the king in between the rooks so that you can castle. You want one bishop on a light square, the other on the dark square, in order to preserve this sort of symmetry that we're used to. Because of these rules, 960 comes from the fact that that's how many positions you have. The idea here is to negate opening theory. Fischer believes that if it became computationally infeasible to memorize the best starting moves for all these 960 permutations, the players would have to play on instinct. They have to base their moves off of just how they believed the pieces worked together. It is extremely difficult and it's very weird to play because all opening theory is out the window. Well, I give one of my favorite examples here. I think this was incredible. The current world champion, so the best player in the world, Magnus Carlsen, in the 2019 FIDE World Fischer Random Chess Championship, lost by almost 10 points to Wesley So. And this is the best player in the world, and he has been for a good long while. This just shows how different the game is. He's the best player in the world. He should be beating someone like Wesley So pretty consistently, but to lose by effectively 10 games, it's quite an upset. So this is an example of what it might look like. In fact, this one I chose from Wesley So versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, which was played 2 days ago, September 8th, I believe. Featured a wonderful knight sacrifice, but this is the position that they started with. See the queen's over there in the corner, which is weird. King's over in the other corner, which is weird. 2 bishops in the middle, unusual. You could probably guess that Fischer Random is much more difficult to solve than regular chess. And part of this reason is because the first move advantage is now on a sliding scale. In fact, the engine says that some of the Fischer Random chess starting positions are perfect draw, 0-0. For others, it's almost half a pawn advantageous for white to move first. Very weird stuff. On the other side, I thought we'd look at something that's easier than chess. Anti-chess, also sometimes called losing chess. Oh yeah, I see some shaking their heads. It's absolutely bonkers. Makes no sense to me. It's what's called a misery game, where the goal is to lose all of your pieces. Okay, but because of that, we have to introduce some weird rules. Most importantly is that capturing is compulsory. If a player can make a capture, they must. If they can make multiple captures, they just have to choose between them. But every turn that you can capture, you have to. Weird. The king has been stripped of his royal powers So this means there's no such thing as check. There's also no such thing as checkmate. The king is just another piece. It's very weird to play king takes king, which in a normal move, to me, in a normal game would be very illegal. And then the game keeps going on without kings. Lastly, the winning condition is the first player who's unable to make a legal move wins. So, for example, if all of my pieces have been captured, great, I win. If all of my pieces except for pawns have been captured, but my pawns cannot make any legal moves, perhaps they're blockaded, cool, I win. Intriguingly, anti-chess has been weakly solved. There exists about a dozen openings for white that lose by force. And I know of at least one that wins by force. E4 and D4 are, in order, the most common chess openings for white. Most popular first move is E4. Second is D4, and that makes up just about all chess games. For white, they are losing with perfect play. I thought that I would just show this study, which is in anti-chess, just to show how weird it gets. So I claimed that E3 was a forced win for white. This just gives one of the possible chains that we can go down. So for example, if, hello? Oh, that was weird. Cool. For example, if black plays B5, we can see that it is possible for white to capture this pawn. So they must. Capturing is compulsory. So white's forced to capture. Black can give up another pawn, and white's forced to capture. Now black has to capture this bishop, either with the pawn or the knight, but must capture. And then the game just devolves. So forced capture, knight has to capture, makes a move, knight has to capture, has to capture. Goodness, it just goes absolutely insane. And I'll just skip down a little bit just to make sure we're all on the same page. It ends up in some sort of crazy position like this, where white has no captures that they can make, so they can just make whatever move. But they want to keep black constantly having to make captures. And now that's checkmate, so white wins. Super weird. The fact that it's been weakly solved, I think, is shocking. Losing by force, almost a dozen openings. Crazy. There are still some that are up for grabs, I believe. Let's talk about chess engines for a moment, because I just showed you a couple of chess engines. The horizon effect is a problem that computers encounter when they're trying to evaluate chess positions, but they can only search so many moves in advance, so they misevaluate the repercussions of a potential move because it's beyond the horizon, it's past their field of view. So for example, if giving up a knight on, I don't know, move 5 results in checkmate on move 10, if the engine can only see, say, 3 moves in advance, it won't see that giving up that knight leads to checkmate. So it won't recommend it because it looks like it's just giving up a knight. But it's missing the fact that beyond the horizon is checkmate. A fortress is a configuration of pieces in which we set up a defensive barrier so that the other player cannot enter this area. Fortresses lead to the horizon effect because engines just can't evaluate those sorts of things well. I have a couple of examples here for us. This one is a classic by Rudolph. I actually think it's a great puzzle. Does anyone want to take a moment, see if they can figure out the right answer here? Want to just shout it out? White to move.
Is it pawn c4?
Pawn c4. You're right. Pawn c4 is in there, but that's not our first move.
All right.
It's not so easy, right? Here, I'll give it to you. Shockingly, it's bishop to a5. Part of the reason why is because this bishop is cutting off the dark squares from the king. So the king can only land on these white squares along this diagonal. So with this check, the king has nowhere to go. It must capture. And then do you see what's going on? Yeah. We can play b3, which checks the king. So king can't take because it's protected by this a pawn, and can't interpose a piece because, well, there's no space to interpose. So the king is forced to move up this light square diagonal. And we can play the same sort of game. Check on pawn c4, and the king, well, can't go back because the pawn is there, can't go to any of these dark squares, so it has to go up. You can keep checking all the way up here. Now the king has some choices, but of course it's going to take the bishop. I mean, why not? It's a free bishop. And then white can close down the position with f5. Now watch this. This is where it gets crazy. I'll turn on the engine. Engine says minus 15, almost minus 16. So the engine thinks that black is up 2 rooks and a bishop and the equivalent of another bishop. But wait a minute, that can't be right. All of these pawns are perfectly immobile. They're not moving anywhere. This bishop can never get past these pawns. So it can't, say, attack the king. This rook is never getting past these pawns. If it ever goes, say, right there where white can take it, white's not going to take it. It's just going to bounce back and forth. Okay. Put the rooks anywhere you want. White's just going to bounce back and forth. So this forms a forbidding. None of black's pieces can pass. And white's goal here now is just to bounce back and forth. Okay, play whatever you want. White's just going to bounce back and forth between these 2 squares, which means that the game is not going to progress anywhere useful. So it's a draw. The computer severely misevaluates this position, in part because of the horizon effect. It thinks that perhaps somewhere down the line, black can take advantage of this material advantage. But no, there's nothing that black can do. Total draw. Here's another one, which I am a big fan of. So this is Petrosian v. Hazai from 2006. Not Tigran Petrosian, Arshak Petrosian. There's another famous player, in fact, a couple named Tigran Petrosian. This is not that one. So Petrosian here falls into Hazai's trap, which is a fortress. Hazai plays queen to b6. Well, if you know how the knight moves, looks like a free queen. So of course, Petrosian takes a free queen. Hazai takes back. I think this is just, yeah, okay. Petrosian can make a queen move here, but h4 in order to try and disrupt this pawn structure over here, but it doesn't really matter. Hazai takes back, there's some queen move, and then Hazai can push h3. So now there's a choice. Petrosian can take or do nothing. If Petrosian does nothing, I don't know, say make some random move, Hazai is going to take. Of course, the queen has to take, or else this pawn is going to the back rank and will promote. Takes, and then the position closes down a bit. This queen can never infiltrate and start pushing the king around back here because it always has to keep an eye on this pawn. Okay, so that's not a great ending. But what happens if white takes? This is the move that Petrosian missed when he took the queen. Hazai can push this pawn, and now it's a fortress. There is no way to push past these pawns, the black chain, and this queen isn't getting past. So there's nothing to do. They play a handful more moves before Petrosian finally realizes, yeah, this is a complete draw. And if I put this into an engine, if I recall, it will evaluate +8, which is, say, a rook and maybe a knight. But that's not correct. There's no way. This queen is never getting behind this pawn chain. And even if, say, I don't know, queen takes a pawn or queen takes this bishop, that's an awful move. They would never want to play that. So the game ends in a draw, which the engine misevaluates. This is important because a fortress should result in a draw. If one of the players can never get past some blockade, they can never checkmate. Even if they're up materially, which we saw with Rudolph, they were up 2 rooks and a bishop, yet it was entirely useless to them. However, computers have a hard time evaluating these positions correctly. In fact, it is still an open problem in computer science. How do you even detect a fortress? I think that there's actually a bounty on this problem. I think that there's a monetary bounty where if one can figure out how to correctly define a fortress so that a computer engine can see it, there's some sort of money attached to it. That's presumably a lot. Engines, because they fail to see past the horizon, are just awful at it. Like we saw that -15, it's not correct at all. Engines just aren't good at this sort of thing, which I think is good because it means that we as humans have something to bite against when it comes to playing computers. And there are a good handful of games you can look online, very famous ones of some of the early, like Kasparov versus Deep Fritz, some of the first human computer games where they take advantage of this. So what does it mean for the future? In 1967, MacHack was, oh, excuse me, pardon. That's not correct. Excuse me. All right. Yeah, in 1967, this was the first game in which a computer program beat a human. And this was MacHack against Greenblatt, if I recall correctly. But Moore's law says that roughly every 2 years, computing power should double. So if that was in 67, where are we at today? Just about, I mean, goodness, on my phone, I have 3 apps that could beat any grandmaster today. Any grandmaster, easy, with peace odds. So this sort of goes to show just how far we've come. Moreover, Stockfish, which is the most common chess engine, you can get the app for your phone for free. It's rated over 3,500 ELO. Now, we don't have any scale for this. I haven't told you what ELO is, but consider that the average United States Chess Federation player is at about 1,500, and it has diminishing returns. No human has reached over 2,900. As far as I'm aware, the highest is Magnus Carlsen, who is still reigning world chess champion. I believe his was 2880, something like that. So he got close. But still, this is such a massive difference. Even with the diminishing returns, there's just no way someone like, I don't know, you or I could beat Stockfish. Even grandmasters can't beat Stockfish regularly. Well, so what? Sure, computers dominate. Computers are better calculating than any of us, all of us put together. Debatably, that's a good thing. AlphaZero, who is a self-learning chess algorithm, back in 2018, 2019, started to get very good, even beat Stockfish. But here's the thing, when AlphaZero beat Stockfish, it was using non-traditional methods, right? It would push a flank pawn, which is something that's generally not recommended against a 3,500 ELO rated. So grandmasters started to pick up on this. If a machine learning, self-learning algorithm starts doing unusual things and winning, maybe I should. So we started to see, maybe early 2019, grandmasters like Magnus Carlsen started to play their games in unusual ways and win with them. So sure, computers dominate, but this has actually given us more information about chess. We're still an extremely long way off from solving chess, because we saw those numbers, goodness, 10 to the power of 120. That's a stupidly big number. But that is to say, the game still remains interesting. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much for coming. And if you have any questions, let's talk about it.
Well, let's thank our speaker.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome.
That was a good talk.
Okay. So does anybody have any questions for Freeman?
Well, you were talking about chess variants there for a little while, and I was wondering if you had heard of one where they swapped the purposes of the royal pieces. So the king can
intriguing.
move; it's not royal, but the queen is royal, so you can checkmate the queen.
Okay, that makes sense because the queen has better movements than the king. So a queen could escape a checkmate in ways that a king cannot.
Mm.
That's interesting. I'll have to think about that.
So you haven't heard of any variant like that yet?
I have not.
Okay, that's what I was wondering more or less.
I suspect at the end of the day, it's probably close to equivalent to chess because even though the queen can escape from checkmate in ways that a king cannot, you effectively lose the strength of the queen as a checkmating piece.
Mhm. Right. I mean, so what you mean by that is you have to be able to risk the queen to really be aggressive and, win the game, right?
Yes, because there's a classical queen sacrifice. You sacrifice your strongest piece in order to get a guaranteed checkmate. But
Right.
if you can't sacrifice the queen, you're not going to be doing the same thing with a king.
Right. If the queen has royal powers, I mean, what's the king do? Right. It's a pawn that can
Yeah.
go backwards. Yeah, and side to side too. Other questions? You have a question? I don't know if we got everything answered in the chat. So if you put something in the chat,
yeah.
questions.
Oh goodness. I think I might have missed a few. 35 backed up. All right, let's see. Where are we? Let's see.
We're having a full-on conversation in there.
Can two players perform moves that result in a loop that terminates after, for example, a great many? Yes, that is a very interesting question, and moreover, raises the problem of chess on an infinite board, which is a thing. When we say finite state, like with Zermello, we sort of want to cut out these moves because they're not really giving us a new game. So for example, if I just move a knight back and forward a dozen times, and then we play the opening, we haven't really done anything. We might as well just start from the opening, if that makes sense.
All right.
Let's see. Yes, game ends once a position is repeated 3 times, depending on when and where you are playing. 3 full repetition. Yes, when Rodrigo says, I believe a move is defined whenever both black and white move. In computer science, it's called apply, P-L-Y. So a white movement is apply, a black movement is apply, and then between 2 plies, then we make a move. It's not really anything that we need to know here for this, though.
So Freeman, if
So-
they discovered anything about solvability of chess, have you thought about like chess on a torus, like, or a sphere, right?
Mhm.
Like if you play tic-tac-toe on a torus, there's always a winner, right? Any full up position results in a winner.
Part of the problem with, say, chess on a cylinder or chess on a torus is the position of the pawns.
Right.
So for example, let's say we're on a cylinder where we connect the top and the bottom of the boards.
Mhm.
Well, that's a problem because the kings are too close. Okay, well, let's connect the sides. That leads to, I guess issue isn't the right word, but it leads to some unusual play.
Right.
In fact, back in the day, I created a chess puzzle on a torus where one can, I don't remember exactly what it was. It was like a checkmate with a knight and a rook in the middle of the board, which wouldn't happen normally, but
Right.
it's a Taurus, so like you have a side of the board everywhere you look.
That's
You're
right.
effectively playing on an infinite board, but just connecting the sides. So things work differently. If I recall, Schaefer has done some work on that, but I'd have to think more about it. Solvability of chess on a board created for n players. Part of the issue there is the winning condition. I know what you're talking about. For example, like 3-player or 4-player chess, but you sort of have to screw up the movements of the piece a little bit. So what I mean is on like a 3-player chessboard, if you look at it, no, it's a triangle, 3 players. From any flat side, any edge, you have branches that go off in each direction. So moving forward depends on which branch you take.
Mm.
So because of this, pieces like the knight have, I guess, weird moves, like more moves than they should. Whereas something like a rook only has like 2 more branches that they can take. They move forward, but they have to pick whether they're moving forward left or forward right. For
There's actually
4-player
a-
chess, oh yes.
There's actually a 3-player version that's played on a circular board, which
Mhm.
essentially the board is kind of like a Mobius strip and it's all square. So you don't have this branching issue.
Intriguing. Okay, so then it would have to depend on which sort of board we're playing on, which I don't think is a well-defined problem. Depends on who you ask. I was asked privately, do you watch Ben Feingold on YouTube? He's hilarious. I've actually drawn against Grandmaster Ben Feingold. That's my claim to fame. Well, that was a long time ago, back when I was good. Not good anymore. Yes, Ben Feingold is very funny. If any of you are into chess sort of stuff, he's one of those grandmasters who's very approachable, based out of Atlanta. So like within driving distance, really. Very funny guy. Is the term sardonic? He's sardonic. Are there any other questions?
Yeah,
I
other
can help
questions?
with? Yes, sir.
Do you have an online account where we could find you? I saw you using Lee Chess. Do you play on Lee Chess?
I actually prefer Chess just for the visuals. I find that chess.com is a bit too dark. Generally, I do play on chess.com, but I actually haven't played online chess in a long while. I just find it's difficult to learn over online, right? Like, you can play games all day, but actually learning from it, I find, is not so straightforward. I won't give my username here because this is being recorded and might be posted on YouTube, but you have my email, I feel certain.
Thank you.
Rachika says Leechess is better. Let's see,
Kinda-
what's the
kinda is.
solvability of a game in chess in which the moving rules for each piece are non-traditional? So that's still an open problem. It's something called fairy chess. Fairy is in like Tinkerbell, like a fairy. I'm not really sure where this name convention comes from, but fairy chess has been around since the 1800s. The idea is you change the moves of one or some of the pieces. So an example might be you exchange knights with knight riders, which can move twice as a knight. So that's one move. Or you might exchange the bishop for a chancellor, which can move as a bishop or a knight. So some of these get crazy, like very weird. And a lot of the infinite chess boards, like, infinite chess theory relies on the existence of some of these fairy pieces. I don't recall it exactly. It's this super weird name where it's a piece where it's defined by like a tuple, an n tuple. So the first one is it can move forward that many squares. The second one is it can move left or right that many squares. And then that final number is how many consecutive moves it can make. So for example, we might define a knight can move infinitely many knight moves as their turn. Or you might define that a rook can move as a rook, but then at some point it has to move diagonally, some number of moves. And the solvability of this sort of stuff is, as I'm sure you can imagine, extremely complex and convoluted, but some of them on an infinite chessboard, if I recall, have been at least ultra weakly solved. Although the opening position is super weird. Like you have to have pawns on both sides. There's like a knight rider tucked over in the corner, separate from all the other pieces. And it's like 3 squares away from every other piece for some reason. I don't understand that sort of stuff very well, but it's available online at least.
Okay. Other questions? Any other questions? Okay, let's thank our speaker again. Yeah,
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
thanks a lot. I encourage you all to, oh, we got one more question.
Hmm.
What's the question?
We'll wait for a moment for that question to pop up.
Okay.
Ooh, what's the solvability of chess in n dimensions? Oh, that's an intriguing question because it does depend on what dimension we're in. However, it depends on how we define it. So like in Star Trek, they have that weird sort of like tiered chessboard where at some point, if I recall, you can just kind of hop up. That's a different sort of n-dimensional chess as if we were stuffed inside a cube. I believe 5D chess with multiverse time travel is unsolvable in the sense
Yeah.
that no algorithm can exist. Because you can, you can multiverse travel, you can go backwards and undo an accidental move. So in the idea of perfect play, you won't ever need to undo that bad move.
Right.
What if we have more than 2 players? Some of those have been considered, but it's a little bit ill-defined as to what exactly we mean. So for like 3 players, it depends on what sort of board. For 4 players, I think it is effectively just chess, in the sense that it is as or more difficult to find an algorithm for perfect play than it is to simply find it for regular chess, which makes sense. What about wormhole chess? Oh, I suspect that would cause some very big issues because, well, I'm assuming we can teleport anywhere. That one's worth thinking about. You have to put some restrictions on it, like you can only teleport once, something like that. We'll have to talk about that. Yeah, that's an intriguing one.
Okay.
These are some great questions. Wormhole chess.
All right.
Well,
Well,
Rodrigo, if you can teleport infinitely, like an infinite number of times, then the king should theoretically be always able to escape because you can't be covering the whole chessboard with a piece's attack. It's just not feasible. So you'd have to probably specify either you can only teleport, say, once, or you can only teleport to some specific place, or with some specific rule attached, like along a diagonal or something like that.
Maybe there's a fairy piece that can switch places with the king at any given time.
I think that there is, or at least I know that there's some fairy piece that can switch. Maybe it's like exclusively cannot switch with the king or something like that. But I mean, goodness, you can find a fairy piece for every day in the calendar. Ooh, this is a good question from Renzo. Will Chess Club be open to holding tournaments to these non-traditional chess variants? I almost decided last Tuesday to hold the Los Alamos chess variant, which is chess, anti-clerical chess. It's played on a 6x6 as opposed to an 8x8, and you remove the bishops. So no bishops. This was the first chess-like game in which a computer beat a person. It was Maniac on like ENIAC or some crazy nonsense, like punch cards, goodness. And the idea is we remove the bishops and we make it smaller so that the game is easier for a computer to understand. But moreover, I was thinking of doing that because it is simple enough that any of us could play it, but it screws up opening theory. So sort of like the purpose of 960, but it's easier to play. But yes, that's very much open for future chess club meetings.
All right.
Any variant that doesn't screw up opening theory, you'd have to probably get rid of any fairy piece because that's going to mess up opening theory. So I will say yes with Sarawan chess. There are a couple of chess variations which are extremely simple, like Svidler chess, Sarawan chess, etc., where they just change something a little bit, such as no castling or no en passant, something like that. So that should leave opening theory just about the same.
Let me, while I got the opportunity, let me encourage you all to think about the math club next week. We're going to have sort of a poster prep session. This is mainly aimed at undergraduates because there's an upcoming Math for All conference. And so we're going to talk about that and conferences in general. Should be a nice presentation. You grad students might be interested as well because some of you might be either interested in presenting a poster at some point in the future, or B, you might find yourself mentoring an undergraduate at some point now or in the future. So this could be a good math club. If there are any more questions, thank you to Freeman for a fantastic talk. And you all have a great weekend. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you next week, everybody.
Thanks, Freeman. See y'all.